Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today, we are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. At the heart of this sinister story were three people whose lives had turned into the inseparable bonds of David Miller, a successful widower with distinction. Kellen Miller, his son, is an entrepreneur, guy battling the darkness of his Itana's achievement and her father's attractive woman with a drive for success, hid and distressed. The people who lived in Oakwood did not. Heights is aware that behind this exterior of normally, there was a storm approaching that would let forth a flood of fervor. David's treachery and eventual tragedy. Miller was always a powerful figure. Considered to be middle class by birth, family in, he fought his way to the top in 1960 via sheer willpower and an remarkable aptitude for identifying opportunities where only others could see. By his early 30s, David had established the IT company Miller Innovations, business that might ultimately become into a Fortune 500 behemoth. But his success in the workplace comes at a price. David's steadfast commitment to his relationship had been damaged by his work with their only son and his wife, Evelyn. Kellen. Not until Evelyn's premature 2010 cancer-related death that David became aware of how much he actually had given up in order to pursue his aspirations. Filled with sorrow and remorse, David made an effort to mend his friendship. In the years that followed, he and Kellen provided financial support to his son and commercial relationships in dire need, attempting to compensate for time lost. But the emotional detachment that had developed over it was challenging to overcome decades of neglect. Bridge. As he approached his 60s, David discovered himself struggling with a deep feeling of isolation in spite of his affluence and status. He desired the coziness of it was this sincere human connection, vulnerability that is meticulously concealed behind his gleaming exterior, which would ultimately take him in a direction of no return. Growing up under David's shadow, Kellen's journey to Miller wasn't simple. Devoted a large portion of his life to carving out a persona distinct from his father's tremendous achievement. In spite of being able to obtain the greatest education, Kellen scrambled to find money to acquire, establishing himself in the working world. He has tried and failed at a number of ventures: Eatery, a short-lived tech startup, and most lately, a rather prosperous internet advertising firm. However, nothing appeared to be comparable to the magnificent heritage of Miller Innovations. Kellen's fears, stoked by years of perceived insufficiency that showed up as fights of despair and a persistent imposter illness that tainted all of his exchanges. It wasn't until Itana in a neighborhood cafe. In 2020, Kellen experienced a ray of optimism. Her vitality and steadfast faith in his potential gave him fresh vitality. The world. Kellen dared, for the first time in years, to see a future free from the burden of his father's demands. As their bond grew, Kellen revealed up to Itana regarding his intricate. He revealed his friendship with David, disappointments, anxieties, and his desperation, longing for his father's sincere acceptance. He had no idea that by confiding in, he was preparing the music for treachery that would rock the foundations, the pillars of his universe. Behind the brilliant smile of Itana, its quick wit revealed a history tainted by adversity and tenacity derived from an absent father and a teenage mother. In Itana, a tiny community in rural Pennsylvania, discovered early on that in order to survive, adjusting to whatever challenges life presented, her early years were a mixture of transient residences and ephemeral friendships. When her mom relocated from one connection to another, in spite of Itana's volatility, aside from scholarly viewing, her key to a better life is education. She put in a lot of overtime to earn scholarships that enabled her to leave her birthplace and go to college in Boston was where she attended university. Years that Itana's drive for success came to the four people she was juggling. Several part-time jobs while keeping up excellent grades motivated by an unquenchable desire for achievement. Shortly following graduation, she was able to secure employment in a prominent marketing company, swiftly moving up the ranks beside her. A keen intellect and a captivating personality, Itana noticed Kellen Miller when she first met him. In him, not just as a possible mate, but also a doorway to the realm of riches, and the impact she always had, desired, but actually attracted to. The section about Kellen's vulnerability and kindness of her was unable to resist being drawn in by. The whole Miller name symbolized as she grew further involved. Dynamic Itana in the Miller family, she was presented with options that might challenge her commitment, drive, and eventually, the seeds of the fateful are her humanity. A cool fall day was chosen for the affair. Evening at the yearly Miller Charity Innovations Gala. Itana, radiant in an emerald form-fitting gown, went to the event with Kellen, bumping shoulders for the first time with the highest level of society, whereas Kellen anxiously mixed with possibilities. Itana was drawn to investors, entering a dialogue with David Miller. David's hair was well-groomed, and his finely made tuxedo gave off Itana's inability to find magnetism. They discussed art in order to resist themes related to literature and travel that, even with Kellen's generosity, hardly intrigued. Itana watched him as the evening drew on, was unable to ignore the stark disparity between the father and the son. Although David was humble and Kellen was apprehensive, forceful, and self-assured in the weeks that ensued, Itana discovered herself. As she continues to ponder about David, she justified her ideas as legitimate interest in the father of her boyfriend. However, she felt in her heart that there's more brewing underneath the surface. The pivotal moment occurred during a dinner with the family at the Miller mansion. Kellen had made an excuse to take Itana is departing for a crucial business call, and David by himself in the research as they stood in front of a stunning painting that David and his late wife's wedding present. Unintentionally, their hands touched. The electrical shock that went by, unquestionably, David's voice could be heard between them, was scarcely audible above a whisper as he acknowledged how alive he felt. He had not encountered in. Itana acknowledged that her heart was racing for years. In that brief moment, she experienced the same. The instant an imperceptible boundary was crossed, one that could never be between them. Reversed, what started off as snatched glances and prolonged gestures quickly turned into secret meetings and intense feelings. Interactions they would have at random, the manner that cafes, quiet parks, and, ultimately, at the house where David lived when Kellen was out on vacation with his son, company. For his part, David felt caught between excitement and remorse. He was aware of the extent of his treachery, not just but to his late wife's memory, Kellen. However, the vitality Itana enhanced his life was, for the first time in years, intoxicating. He didn't feel like a successful person, entrepreneur, or a bereaved widower, but just as a male, Itana also struggled with. Despite her mixed feelings, she loved Kellen and was appreciative of the security, and he showed affection. But David woke up. She had a passion and enthusiasm for something that excited and frightened her. She could imagine the life with David. She had always envisioned one that was full of, with opulent intellectual stimulation, and as the romance grew more intense, both David, as Itana improved her skills at living two lives, they were proficient in art of deceit, creating intricate alias, and keeping up a front of, often when Kellen is around. But with each lie, the burden of their secret increased, more substantial, threatening to crush them under. burden, not realizing that the meticulously crafted house of cards, was threatening to collapse with terrible outcomes for everyone, included the initial indications that something was amiss who appeared subtly. Alterations in Itana's conduct. Kellen, ever sensitive to the emotions of his girlfriend, observed a fresh restlessness in her, appeared preoccupied throughout their dialogues. Her thoughts were obviously elsewhere. He inquired as to what was troubling her. Itana would dismiss his worries by a brisk chuckle, and a sudden shift in the unexplained was the next topic. Itana, who had consistently been punctual to a fault, started to appear. She was late for the dates she suggested. Uncertain explanations about work, traffic, or crises, but something concerning her tales didn't quite add. Kellen attempted to allay the doubts, entering his thoughts and drawing up his suspicions about his personal fears, but the discrepancies increased throughout the course of the weeks. Become more difficult to overlook, there were whispered phone calls that suddenly concluded when Kellen came in, and enigmatic text messages that Itana hastily removed as soon as Kellen smelled it. Itana had some unusual perfume on her scarf, aroma that evoked a faraway recollection. He was unable to pinpoint. Kellen's paranoia started to spiral. He discovered, constantly monitoring Itana's social media accounts, looking for hints that he would awaken sometime throughout the night. His thoughts were whirling with possibilities of breach of the confidence that had been the foundation of their partnership. Was gradually growing. Suspicion took the role of eroding. It was threatening to devour him. In a vulnerable moment, Kellen revealed his anxieties to his father, David. His expression of worry suggested that his youngster talk honestly with Itana. Maybe she had a straightforward explanation. Actions. He implied the irony of his Kellen was unaware of the dishonest remarks, who had never been very skilled at lying in an effort to bring up the topic. Itana, however, has the ability to deftly was born after weeks of deceit. She accused him of avoiding his queries, of having excessive possessiveness, and being reminded, considering everything she had given up to be with him. Kellen, filled with regret, apologized to him a lot and promised to be more trustworthy. However, doubt had already been sown, and it kept on. As Kellen grew, he saw further oddities. How Itana and his father seemed to divulge inside gags that he was not aware of, the manner in which their gazes would lock across the lingering in the room at family events. Too long of a moment. Kellen couldn't get his concerns dispelled. Made the decision to handle things himself. He started recording in depth. He inserted songs that come and go. Her phone has a tracking software installed he even went under the pretense of a security update, to the extent of employing a private investigator, a choice that made him feel equally parts embarrassment and resolve. As Kellen went further into his inquiry, he didn't know that he was dismantling a network of deception that would get him closer to the truth, more agonizing than he ever could have thought. The scene was prepared for conflict that would change during their entire lives, forever. On a hot day, the day of reckoning arrived. Kellen, acting on a tip on the afternoon of August, his private investigator had made a call in seek for employment, and Itana was followed. As his heart pounded when she left their flat. Instead of going to her office, he followed her automobile, as she stated, but to a remote, waterfront real estate on the edge of town. Felt as though his stomach was sinking. Kellen became aware that he knew the home was among his father's several properties, investments, a location that David often visited for commercial purposes, retreats, while seeing Itana's vehicle pull in the driveway, a well-known black, the Mercedes that belonged to his father, appeared, partly concealed by a big oak. Kellen's world swung on its axis, and he gripped the steering wheel while seated in his automobile. He turned his knuckles so hard that White is considering the ramifications of what he was. Recognizing that a part of him wanted to leave, must act as though he hadn't seen this. Treachery with a more powerful, primordial component encouraged him, moving forward with lead-like legs. Kellen went to the front door of the home. Was opened. They hadn't anticipated any disruptions in their remote haven. As he entered the refreshing, he could hear their voices floating inside. Soft laughing coming from the bedroom upstairs. Unmistakable sounds of intimate whispers. The desire felt as one ascended the steps. Similar to a trip through. When he eventually arrived at the quicksand, Kellen stopped at the bedroom door, placing his hand on the doorknob. At the very time, he realized that the act of opening the door would permanently shift everything. While inhaling deeply, he flipped the handle and entered the image that met Kellen's eyes would be burned into his consciousness for all time. Is a father and girlfriend that are involved with each other. The other person's arms froze at his abrupt appearance. For a little period, appeared to remain still as the three of them gazed, regarded one another in appalled stillness. Aitana made the initial move, rushing to use the bed sheet to cover herself. Wear a mask of dread and shame. David, recuperating swiftly from the original shock, sprang to his feet, his face changing from surprise to an odd combination of disobedience and shame. David, Kellen's kid, started speaking, somewhat unusually uncertain, although, prior to his carrying on, Kellen's calmness broke years of resentment that had been bottled up. Uncertainty, and now outright treachery. With a savage roar of pain and fury, Kellen lunged forward, his rage aimed at Aitana and his father. Both acknowledged his. He lashed while keeping his eyes on David, openly asking out loud how his father may turn on him like, then shifting his voice to Aitana, brimming with passion as he articulated his Aitana of betrayal and sentiments of love. Feeling overwhelmed, I attempted to contact, through her tears, begging Kellen for opportunity to clarify, stating that the scenario wasn't what it seemed. Yet Kellen was too outraged to listen. He overturned a lamp out of rage. Its shattering boom punctuated the den. Kellen's sour chuckle filled the air. The room as he asked in a mocking tone, what else was he expected to consider? Finding his girlfriend in bed. David, his father, is trying to calm down the tensions. He went to his son and requested that he talk about the issue. He asserted calmly that they had never meant to be harmful, yet this statement simply made things more intense. Kellen was furious and responded angrily, demanding to be informed of their results, anticipated from their activities. As the altercation intensified, the space became into a battlefield of unfiltered. Voices were raised, charges were made, and emotions were felt. To a ferocity fueled by his rage, Kellen started throwing things all over the room, a book, a vase, or anything else around. At last, David's patience gave out, and he yelled out at his kid, defending his acts by asserting that Aitana forced him to experience genuine life in a manner that neither this was never there in Kellen or his mother. Bringing up Kellen's mother's passing prompted, Kellen yelled at him, pushing him over the edge. Protected the memory of his mother by saying something neither she nor David had ever earned. Or the crossfire of Aitana frantically attempted to soothe both guys. Yet the debate ignored her cries, became unmanageable with father and son digging up unresolved issues from years. Problems they accused each other of. Further remarks on partiality, negligence, and sentiments of inadequacy that are interconnected with the intense suffering of the present. Betrayal during a sudden epiphany. In the middle of the confusion, Kellen recognized he needed tangible proof that this treachery occurred. He was afraid that without evidence, David's influence and the manipulation of Aitana would skew the facts, forcing him to be perceived as merely envious. Illogical. Kellen's boyfriend's eyes landed on his. He had left the phone on a neighboring dresser as he walked into the space, and that, as soon as he decided that would permanently alter all of their lives, he declared his plan to reveal Itana and David's vows that everyone would discover the reality regarding their characters. As he grabbed his phone, a panicked expression appeared on David's face. During that brief moment, the elder man recognized the consequences of what his son was going to commit: the scandal, destroy his company, reputation, and everything he had spent decades trying to create. A moment of utter terror, and to protect himself, David sprang forward. David's attitude abruptly changed from rage to despair. He screamed in desperation, his horse-like voice and full dread, something he strongly objected to. Kellen's threat to reveal what they were doing, evidently frightened by the implications of the abrupt shift in David's tone, shown how much he was prepared to lose if the truth was revealed, implying that the broad ramifications of this revelation could have gone beyond their close relatives. As David's drama began to calm down, Kellen's chest came into touch with hands. Wasn't a hard push, but more a desperate attempt to stop his son from recording, but Kellen was taken by surprise. The abrupt movement caused him to stumble backward. A little balcony was accessible from the bedroom. Observing the balcony and the beach, the door was left ajar to let the billowing thin curtains of the sea breeze softly, and the breeze, as Kellen's lower back faltered, struck the railing of the balcony. Kellen teetered on the edge for a heartbeat. Swinging his arms in an attempt to recover his equilibrium, Itana and David looked on in terror from where Kellen's point of gravity moved slightly, portion as well. Distance, with a startled expression on Kellen's face, dropped back over the railing, a choked scream out of his mouth. 3 stories down, he fell to his body, hitting with a painful thud the patio made of concrete. Below, the air was pierced by Itana's scream, breaking the brief stillness that David stood after Kellen's collapse. His face went pale, and he was unable to understand what had just transpired. Breaking out of his reverie, he hurried to Itana was shoved aside by the balcony. What he saw below would haunt him. Kellen lay with him for the remainder of his life, his body twisted as he stood still on the terrace, irregularly angled, and a puddle of his head was progressively covered in blood. The situation had taken a catastrophic and dramatic turn. In a frenzy, Itana attempted to, her hands shaking, she called for an ambulance. She grabbed her phone, but David, with a somber comprehension of the circumstances, discovered that it was too late. The way Kellen landed after falling made it was evident that death had been as immediate as the terrible truth of the passing of his only son started to set in. David's analytical side kicked in, began to move. He halted Itana before she might grip her wrist and make the call. With uncanny composure, he proposed that they have to consider carefully their upcoming. Itana was taken aback and perplexed, questioned the behavior of David, urging that they required assistance from David's voice, somewhat cracked with emotion, stated that even though it was now it would be too late for Kellen to contact for assistance now. Only lead to the two of them traveling there, jail, while they struggled with this ethical conundrum. The sound of sirens approaching sliced through the atmosphere, most likely caused by one of the neighbors who heard Itana cry. Itana and David stood side by side on the balcony, the consequences of their behavior and the crucial choice they had to make, dangling like a thick cloud in the sky. The hours that followed went by in an incessant swirl of flashing lights, inquiries, and hastily created. When the cops showed up, David and Itana had calmed down and decided on a tale about Kellen's drinking. They claim to have unintentionally fallen away from the balcony following a furious dispute about his alcohol use. David used his extensive expertise and the story of the business discussions create a story with believable suffering and remorse that he mentioned Kellen's alleged challenges with alcohol, weaving the story of his kid, who was disturbed, been frantically attempting to assist Itana, who is still clearly disturbed. Confirmed his account in between tears. The responding law enforcement officials identifying David as he was treated by a well-known local person. They made introductory steps with respect, declarations, and blocked off the space, letting David know that they will carry out a comprehensive analysis, but that all signs led to a tragedy incident during the removal of Kellen's body, and David's early activity subsided. Itana withdrew inside the house, burdened by the magnitude of what, in addition to the romance they were devastated by the cover-up as well, by everything's weight, much like a physical, applying pressure. We must rectify our tale with them.